I'm always doing something that I have to have another creative outlet. I mean, I have the writing of my books, but there's always something else going on. And it always appears in my books. And Marrakesh, I had to bring some of Marrakesh into this garden. I would love to have like a proper floor, like a lovely Marrakesh sort of tiled floor fountain, but I don't know, maybe. I think it's the trick is always you don't want to recreate a Marrakesh riad here in Westport, Connecticut, but it's adding elements and mixing them with what's here. I think you said when you walked in, oh, this feels like coastal Morocco, which is kind of perfect. It's like coastal grandma meets Morocco. This was my birthday present to myself, but actually, and I drew it, and the poppies are actually sort of inspired by poppies that Anita Pallenberg drew, and Anita Pallenberg was also featured in Sister Stardust, and Paul Getty and Talita, I mean, they were both doing a lot of opium, so this is all. And then the snake is based on a snake that Yves Saint Laurent drew when he was living in Marrakesh. He would send postcards to his friends every Christmas, and he would do these beautiful drawings, and this was a snake motif that he used. And so I have this is my little Marrakesh Sister Stardust Talita tattoo. Bill Willis was an American from Kentucky who traveled Europe in the 60s with a wealthy older woman. He was gay, but he was her sort of companion, and he ended up in Rome with a shop at the bottom of the Spanish Steps where he became great friends with Paul and Talita Getty. And he then moved to Marrakesh, fell in love with Marrakesh, lived there for the rest of his life. But he encouraged Paul and Talita Getty, which is that's who this book is about, and the Rolling Stones. He brought them to Marrakesh on honeymoon. He said, I'll be your guide. And by the end of the day, he'd shown them this dilapidated palace that they bought for $10,000. And Bill Willis said, let me renovate it for you. I'll be the designer and decorator. And he went on to decorate Yves Saint Laurent's homes and tons of homes of the rich and the famous and the great and the good. But he really started with Paul and Talita Getty, and he brought a lot of the arts that had been used either in mosques or hammams or in very wealthy homes. He brought them back and made them fashionable again. So things like zalij, which is the very intricate Moroccan tile, and tadlakt, which is the ornate plaster and the carved plaster. So their palace is extraordinary and filled with, the courtyards are tiled in this sort of tiny, like a herringbone green tile, and it's just exquisite. I'd advise anyone doing a garden, really think of it as a series of rooms, and that is how the great garden designers thought of it. So it's not just a space, and even, I've had people say, oh, come and see my garden, and I'm expecting to walk into a full garden, and what they mean is a little vegetable garden. But when I think of garden, I think of a series of rooms, all of which link up together, so it sort of makes sense, so you can imagine yourself using every part of the garden. It also makes it easier to do if you're taking a blank space, rather than it can be so overwhelming to think about how to do it. And then if you actually think, well, maybe I divide it into fours, and maybe the kids play here and there's a swing set, and maybe here is a vegetable garden, and maybe there's a path going through that sort of leads you to each section. And that would be my greatest tip. And also use different elements, use stone. Like I love an old stone stacked wall or a dry stacked wall in a garden, gravel, and it's always nice to have a water feature somewhere. Whether it's my very rubbish solar fountain from Amazon that is so rubbish I've actually ordered an electric one, but just to have the sound of water is always very peaceful. I don't use chemicals on the garden, and I didn't in the old house, but it's really, really hard to keep a lawn looking good without chemicals, and especially with the kind of weather that we now have, although I feel like there's more rain than I've remembered before here in my 21 years of living here. But I'm definitely, in one of the things that I'm seeing in England is so many people are replacing grass with astroturf because it's ecologically just so much more environmentally friendly. And I definitely, part of my thought was the gravel was just to reduce the amount of lawn. And I love green in the garden, but I'm definitely keen to perhaps reduce the amount of lawn here.